Dr. Paul, I'd like to begin with you. Every debate begins with a specific policy question, but this is a little different. Someone on this stage hopes to be able to take the oath of office 14 months from now, and at the end of that oath are the words, "So help me God." When you hear those 4 words, if you have the opportunity and the privilege to say them, what will come to mind?
Well, I think they're very important. Those of us who have been in Congress and served in government, we take an oath frequently. We take an oath to uphold the Constitution. And that's what we do when we take an oath when we're sworn in as president. We emphasize this. But I think what that does, it emphasizes it even more so because of the significance and the importance. And it reiterates the fact that we swear to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law. And to me, this would mean that you're not only saying this, in front of a small number of people, not only in front of the nation, but before our God, which means the significance is that much greater. So those of us who have done this before, and I've taken my oath rather seriously, very seriously, and believe that I've done a very good job in upholding the Constitution, and even when sometimes it's difficult. And this to me would send a signal that by saying, "So help me God," I really will obey the Constitution and that pledge. I think the issue is obviously very important, and we can charge one side or the other of influencing our culture too much. But the goal of government isn't to mold society and mold people. The role of government is to preserve liberty, so we as individuals assume the responsibility and our families assume the responsibility. Our values should come from our family and from our church. But once we say, well, the liberals are doing this because they want this economic interference and we're going to have perfect balance and fairness, they overdo it. But you can do it on both sides. You can say, well, we're going to make people better by having more laws. I think culture is very important. Culture has a reflection on the law, and I think that is very good. But the law can't reflect the morality of the people. If you do that, you have embarked on something where you sacrifice liberty. Once you turn this over to government, when government assumes this role, it can only do that at the sacrifice of liberty. So our goal ought to be to preserve liberty so that we have our religious values and we make our own decisions. If we can make our self-determination for our hereafter and our spiritual life, certainly on our own personal habits and our economic habits and how we spend our money, certainly we should assume that the people can do this. The guidance should come from individuals, from our family, and from our church. I think it's wrong to assume that if you legalize liberty and freedom, that because somebody might do something wrong, you don't want to legalize it. Liberty doesn't mean libertine. It means you have choices, but you suffer the consequences. It does not mean endorsement. When you legalize freedom of choice, think about it in a religious sense. We legalize, and we do a pretty good job in this country on the First Amendment. We legalize our freedom of choice in our religious value. But in this country, you're even allowed to be an atheist. But if you say, well, there's the danger of being atheist, so we can't legalize freedom of choice in religion, or we can't legalize freedom. Maybe somebody will want too many homeschoolers. So no, you want to legalize liberty. You don't want to designate what your beliefs are going to be because somebody might abuse it. And they have to assume the responsibility for making the mistakes. But because somebody might make a bad choice, you don't say give up on liberty. This is what the liberals do when they come to economics. Somebody might not make a good choice. They might not take care of themselves. They might not save for their retirement. So therefore, we have to be the protector. We have to protect the people from themselves. So I think overall, the defense of liberty is really what we need in this country because we're losing it, unfortunately.
What is your worldview? And speak of it in terms of freedom, responsibility, and morality.
I talk about it a whole lot because I talk about freedom a lot and I talk about responsibility. And I tell young people, and I talk to a lot of young people, that if we can get a free society today and get you out into a position where you don't have to endorse government medicine and government education and you can opt out of Social Security, I says one thing is if you get your freedom, you have to accept the responsibility. You can't, if you fail in taking care of yourself, and if you want your freedom to do that and you don't do well, You don't have a right to go to your neighbor directly, and you don't have a right to go to your government and say, go to my neighbor and take care of me because I didn't meet up with my responsibilities. They have to face the consequences. No, the states definitely have a right to be wrong, and the states are supposed to correct it. But there are limits, and that's why we have a Constitution. But the Constitution doesn't give license to the federal government. I mean, the federal government has taken license, and they're too much involved, but the Constitution is a restriction on the federal government. It's not a restriction on the states, and it's not a restriction on personal liberties. So therefore, what we must do is obey the law. Slavery and civil liberties, I mean, there's quite a few things, but not most things. Most things were left to the states. Monetary issue was left to the federal government. Defense was left to the federal government. But most, like education, why in the world have we ever drifted to the point where we allow this casualness to ignore the Constitution and say it's a federal function? We don't need the Department of Education. We need those things taken care of up at the state level.
Governor.
And the Energy Department, too.
Governor, is there a third area you want to cut?
On that, I have supported the amendment that defines life at conception. I think that's important. But I don't endorse the idea that the enforcement should come from the federal government. We don't need another police force in Washington. We already have 100,000 bureaucrats running around with guns, so we don't need more enforcement. All acts of violence under our Constitution, like murder and injury and robbery, that's not a federal offense. It's a state offense, and laws do vary. So I would not want to repeal that provision. It was meant that it would be handled at the states. And we have to remember, when we tend to nationalize things, we expose ourselves to great danger, because when they make a mistake, it's national. This is the reason that we had Roe versus Wade. They should have never heard that case. They nationalized it. So I'm very cautious about nationalizing these laws. So it would be much better to state when life begins, make the law enforcement at the state level, which has been traditional. But it should not be that we enforce this law at the national level, but there's no reason why we can't define when life begins.
But if they nationalize the problem, why is it wrong to nationalize the solution?
Well, and I would be glad to do that. And the solution, it would have been solved 10 years ago, because I've been pushing a law that could have been passed by majority vote when we had the House and the Senate and the presidency. If we would have been determined, we could have repealed Roe versus Wade by passing the law called the We the People Act. It removes the jurisdictions from the federal court. So you remove this jurisdiction, which is a constitutional authority. That could have been done 10 years ago. We could have continued to work on the amendment. We could have continued to change the courts. But if we would have passed that by majority vote, we would have saved millions of lives, and we have not had the support from the Right to Life community to at least do that, and I do not understand why that is the case, because we would have accomplished that in a short period of time. We would have not distracted from the national solution of amending the Constitution and changing our Supreme Court. I was born and raised in Pennsylvania in a family of 5 boys during the Depression, so I remember the tail end of the Depression and World War II, and they weren't such great economic times. But our family was oriented around the church. It was oriented around our family life, a lot of hard work and a work ethic. And the work ethic taught us all at a very young age that you worked and you were rewarded for this. But the important things in the church life for me came as a Lutheran, making the decision to go through catechism, which is somewhat different than others. So that catechism and making the decision to join the church, as well as being exposed to a couple of crusades by Billy Graham, was the time when I made my commitment to Christ, and it was a very important period in my life. But you said we exempt, our wives and our children because they are so important and they are at the top of our list. But there was something that was given to me in many ways. In many ways I earned because of something I wanted to do. And that was going through medical school. And finally getting through the military and all my training, but going into medical practice was really astounding because to me it was the assumption that people will come to me in trust, and that I took very, very seriously. And although I didn't have a personal experience like Herman had for medical illness, I got to share those experiences, and I'm sure your doctors were very important. So I got to share that with new life coming into the world. There's nothing more marvelous in medicine than sharing new life and having delivered thousands of babies. And this is a very joyous profession. But then there was something else that happened that I feel very blessed with, because I had an inquisitive mind and I wanted to know how the world worked and how the economy worked and why we had recessions and depressions. So I was fascinated not with fishing and hunting. I got fascinated with reading economics. And then I thought speaking out would be a lot of fun, but it led to a little bit of involvement in a political life. I feel very lucky that I am blessed that I've been able to practice medicine, have my family, and also participate in public life, and I'm very thankful.
I'm curious. Are you prouder that you are a duly elected member of Congress, or are you prouder of your medical profession?
Oh, the medical profession by far, you know. Doctors are still rated a lot higher in the polling than the politicians. I think my most difficult issue to deal with is I'm my own worst critic, and I have to put up my imperfections. I don't know whether it works with anybody else, but I can't stand watching myself on TV because all I see are my imperfections. And that is what I strive for, is to try to learn and try to improve my delivery and try to deliver a message which I think is honest and true. And I think I come up short because I think I always can do better. But to find one incident where I think I really goofed it or I had to suffer through it, it's almost arrogant to think that I can't find any one thing about it. If I've only done this, things would have been much better off. So I have been so pleased, to be able to participate in the great debates of our country and to be able to practice medicine. And I think that my greatest thing, in family, I mean, I've had a great family. I've been married 54 years, have 5 kids, 18 grandchildren, 5 great grandchildren.
So no failures.
So everything is wonderful.
So no failures.
So, but the biggest struggle I had, it seems so incidental, and I don't know whether anybody ever goes through it, but it's something in a teenage year. Teenage years are important psychologically, but compared to what I've received and what I've been able to do and enjoy, it seems so incidental. And that was a physical problem, because I probably had set for a pretty darn good career in athletics, particularly in track and maybe in football and maybe even baseball. But I had some severe injuries, and I really never recovered from them to get to my top speed again. And that was a problem for me. In a teenager, I think maybe we can understand it as a teenager, but now that I look back, why was it such a big deal for me? But it was a big deal for me, but I think I overcame it.